Welcome to the Wellfuel Podcast, your spot for everything gut health, detox, hormones, a healthy home, mold, and everything in between. I'm your host, Isabel Smith. I'm an integrative and functional registered dietitian and the founder of Isabel Smith Nutrition.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Wellfuel Podcast. I'm your host for today, Sydney Flippo. I am one of the registered dietitians on Team ISN, and I am so excited to be talking to you today about COVID and how it impacts our gut health and what we are seeing in practice with some of our clients who have long COVID or have struggled with COVID infections. So I think that we're far enough removed from the initial COVID infections now to have some research on what might make someone more susceptible to a COVID infection or what might contribute to what's happening with long COVID and what we're seeing there. So we've had enough years now to have some research out on this topic, which is really cool and really interesting. I'm sure that you won't be surprised to hear that the gut microbiome actually does play a big role here. And I think to understand why, we have to think back to how the gut is set up and how our gut kind of protects our immune system. So if you've listened to some of our chats before, you probably heard us talk about the fact that about 70 to 80% of our immune cells live in our guts. They live in like the gut lining. So at the very bottom, if we think about our intestinal wall, they're living there on our intestinal wall. Above that, we have a layer of mucin or a layer of protective mucus. And then above that, we have bacteria. So our first line of defense for the body in the gut in particular is that level of bacteria, right? That first level of bacteria that's going to be protecting the mucin, and it's also going to be protecting the gut lining. And because that bacterial layer is so important, it really shouldn't come as a surprise that they found that people who had more severe cases of COVID had less bacterial diversity. So they really were lacking diversity in that level of bacteria, that first line of defense. Research had shown that patients were especially low in a keystone bacteria or a keystone phyla of bacteria called Bacteroides. So we didn't have enough of that Bacteroides to create the correct response to fight off that virus. So it was just kind of interesting that lack of gut diversity that people possessed made them a little bit more susceptible to a severe case of COVID. What's also interesting, though, is that we've also seen changes in the microbiome once people recover from COVID. So maybe you didn't have such a bad case of COVID or you had a more mild case of COVID, but research has shown us that the gut can stay inflamed after a COVID infection, which actually affects the bacterial makeup of the gut and can cause those prolonged COVID symptoms and other GI symptoms post-COVID. So things like IBD, leaky gut, inflammation, gut-brain axis dysregulation, mast cell activation syndrome, histamine issues. It's a whole gambit of things that can actually happen when our gut stays inflamed after a COVID infection. So it's just very interesting that even if you didn't have a severe case of COVID, we could still see that inflammation causing issues with bacterial makeup and causing some of those prolonged symptoms and infections. What's also interesting to think about too is that some of our bacteria, like Akkermansia muciniphila, supports the mucosal layer. So Akkermansia muciniphila in particular consumes mucin, which causes the body to actually make more mucin, which strengthens that mucosal barrier and is critical for maintaining our gut barrier underneath of that. So those tight junctions, that mucin is very, very important for maintaining tight junctions. So when we have lower Akkermansia muciniphila, we're starting to break down that mucin layer a little bit, and we're starting to get a little bit more leaky gut as well. So it's just very interesting, all of the research that is coming out. And I'm sure we'll see more research over the coming years at really how much of an impact gut health makes on COVID and how much of an impact COVID makes on our gut health post-infection. So I think it's kind of also interesting to apply this to what we've seen in practice, because we see a lot of clients who have long COVID. We see a lot of our clients who maybe have had a COVID infection and maybe it's, started some symptoms that they had gotten rid of before. So in practice so far, we are seeing in our long COVID and like post COVID patients a lot of lack of beneficial bacterial diversity. So the good bacteria. So a lot of low Akkermansia, a lot of low beneficial phylo-like Bacteroides firmicutes. We might be seeing lower Roseburia, lower Facilibacterium pralunitzi. There's a lot of bacteria that are good that we're seeing low numbers and low diversity of. Sometimes we also will see overgrown bacteria. We could see things like fungus and yeast. We could see bacteria that is causing histamine reactions. We could see things like H. pylori. There's a lot of different things that we see, and it really depends on the client and where maybe they had some weaknesses before that we're seeing this kind of brings that to the surface. We also see a lot of inflammation in the gut, a lot of high inflammation post COVID in people. And so when we see a lot of high inflammation and low beneficial bacteria, we see a decrease in that intestinal barrier, right? Because those are the first two layers that protects the immune cells in the gut. So it really can also bring down the immune cells. So that marker that we see in stool test results is secretory IgA that gives us kind of an insight to that. We see a lot of low secretory IgA as well in those clients. So it's very interesting to see. Sometimes we'll see anti-gliadin markers as well. So some food sensitivity stuff that's going on with intestinal barrier too. So lots of different things that we're seeing in practice that kind of support what the research is showing that can happen with increased levels of inflammation after a COVID infection. So what can we do if we have had COVID and we're worried and we have some gut issues? I would say first and foremost, work with somebody, of course. It's helpful to have testing to really see what's going on internally so that we can really target that treatment for you a little bit better. But in general, I think prebiotic fibers are really important because they feed the good gut bacteria that we tend to be lacking. I think that having a diet high in antioxidants is also important as well. So that's going to be an anti-inflammatory diet with lots of colorful fruits and vegetables. Antioxidants can be broken down by the bacteria in our gut. And so having a lot of them in our gut or in our diet is going to help to make that gut microbiome a little bit more diverse. With prebiotic fibers, sometimes we need a little bit of extra help there. Maybe we are not getting enough in through our diet because it can be hard to eat enough of those types of fibers if we're feeling bloated, if we're feeling, constipated and things like that. But prebiotic fibers are going to come from some of our resistant starches. So our like overnight oats, cooked and cooled potatoes, cooked and cooled rice. We have some of our higher fiber foods like sunchokes, artichokes that are going to be also giving that good prebiotic fiber. So incorporating some of those things into your diet or looking to supplementation if you don't feel like you're getting enough there. Probiotics are great when we know what we need to supplement with. So a lot of times we will use spore-based probiotics on our clients. They're very, very well tolerated, and they also do a good job of targeting the specific phyla of bacteria that we want to be robust in our gut. But probiotics are definitely something that you probably want to get help with. If we notice that there's a specific bacterial strain that's low that we want to supplement, we will also sometimes include supplementation for that. So like the Akkermansia muciniphila that I was talking about before, there are some probiotic supplements and strains that actually help to bring up that Akkermansia muciniphila. So just definitely probiotics, definitely a healthy anti-inflammatory diet, definitely lots of colorful fruits and vegetables and resistant starches. I also think it's important to think about our lifestyle as well, right? So are we getting enough sleep? Are we lowering our stress levels? Are we getting activity that we love? Are we finding joy within our day? Those are so important and things that I think are overlooked when we're thinking about just gut health, how our overall lifestyle impacts everything else. So make sure you're getting enough sleep. Make sure you're doing something to relieve stress for yourself. Make sure that you are doing an activity that you love that feels good for your body, and also find joy in your day. if you are doing these things already and you're not getting better, please reach out to talk to somebody about your symptoms, about what's going on, so that somebody can take a closer look at what's going on in your gut. We would be happy to do that for you. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to talk to our team so that we can get you on the schedule to chat with you and see what's going on. I hope that this was informational and interesting for you. If you have any topics that you would like for us to cover, please drop them in our inbox in our Instagram. We'd love to be able to cover more topics that you want to hear. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you next time on the Wellfuel Podcast.
As always, thanks so much for listening to the Wellfuel Podcast. We're so happy to have you. To make sure you don't miss a beat, please subscribe either on Apple or Spotify, because we have episodes dropping once or more a week with tons of great content. If you want to make sure that you're up to date on everything we're doing in the business with our clients and new offers and all the things, make sure that you check us out at Isabel Smith Nutrition on Instagram and isabelsmithnutrition.com. See you guys soon.